We are one day out from the safe harbor deadline, and I am more convinced than ever that it is completely meaningless. Because the left had been saying, if you don't challenge the results before then and get it resolved, then the electors count and Joe Biden wins. But then many other pundits, many on the right, said, no, if you don't resolve the dispute, you can't count the electors because electors are currently in dispute. Now, that one kind of makes sense. But at this point, I think it doesn't even matter because now we got the Texas lawsuit moving through. A bunch of states have announced that they intend to legally support this lawsuit from Texas. But full stop, they have not joined the lawsuit. They are not able to join the lawsuit. So far, Texas has requested permission to file a complaint. So there's no process by which other states are piling on. Now, my understanding, I had Will Chamberlain on the show last night. He's a Trump supporting lawyer. He's rather pessimistic and all this stuff. But he said that Alito and Thomas do believe that the Supreme Court is obligated to hear this case. We don't know how the other justices Trump appointed will feel. So that's Gorsuch, that's Amy Coney Barrett, that's Brett Kavanaugh. They could feel obligated as well. And the argument is Texas has standing in this lawsuit because of the vice president, okay? If Kamala Harris becomes vice president, then she is the tiebreaker in Senate votes. Texas is basically saying, while everyone's concerned about the president, we're concerned about the vice president. These other states changed the rules in violation of the electors clause. They say we didn't. That's not fair. We will not allow them to change their rules so they can get a favorable representation in violation of our rights. Now, of course, here we go again. The left is saying, no, it's never going to work. It's crazy. The right is saying, this is it. And the big news right now, Donald Trump has tweeted this morning, we will be intervening in the Texas plus many other states case. This is the big one. Our country needs a victory. We also have another Supreme Court case. There are Republicans in Pennsylvania that have filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Act 77, no excuse mail-in voting. Well, they got denied. Let me just show you what the Supreme Court said. The application for injunctive relief presented to Justice Alito and by him referred to the court is denied. Okay, so the Republicans in Pennsylvania wanted to stop the certification process or whatever process, just freeze everything, basically. Injunction. Then they wanted to sue. Now, SCOTUS has said they're not going to provide injunctive relief. And many people on the right, many Trump supporters are now saying, well, that just means the suit is still pending. They'll still hear it on the merits. They're just not going to provide emergency injunctive relief. Now, I will throw it back to the conversation I had with Will last night, where he said, if they're not going to provide emergency injunctive relief, and this does get heard later on, but they've already certified and counted the votes, then what relief could the Supreme Court possibly grant? Maybe they just say, okay, in the future, you can't use these mail-in voting without a constitutional amendment because it violates the electors clause or something to that effect. Sure, but that means it probably won't have a big impact on the election now. Well, Trump has responded by saying, this was not my case, as has been so incorrectly reported. The case that everyone has been waiting for is the state's case with Texas and numerous others joining. It is very strong, all criteria met. How can you have a presidency when a vast majority think the election was rigged? Now, that's a good point from Trump, but let me slow down for a second. No, other states are not joining in. Technically, they are in the capacity they can. So you know what? Okay, let's not play any games. A bunch of other states have announced they will be supporting Texas in this lawsuit. And this is significant and this is very serious. But as of right now, there's no legal joining of that suit. I'm not sure if that matters because I think the people who bring it up are just saying all of these AGs are voicing their support for the suit. And that's what matters. But, throwing it back to Will, who's a lawyer last night, he basically said the amount of people, the amount of individuals party to the lawsuit doesn't change the merits of the lawsuit. But it does create a very, very interesting problem. If we have, I believe that it's being reported now, there are 8 states who have voiced support. I'm sorry. There are 7 states that have voiced support for Texas, creating 8 states that are moving in this direction. If the Supreme Court refuses to hear the case from Texas, refuses to grant, leave, allowing them to file the complaint, and then refuses to hear it, What do you think that means to the 74 million Republicans, Trump voters, who are watching this play out and then being told the Supreme Court cares not for your complaints? We won't even hear them. I think that shatters everything. You have 8 states right now expressing concern. Okay, and I say states, but officials within these states for the most part, expressing their concern over how the election played out. Long story short, in places like Pennsylvania, the courts and the governors and the secretaries of state changed the rules as to how electors would be chosen in violation of the electors clause, that the state legislature is ultimately the one who decides. Texas is not happy about it. It sounds like, and I think it's fair to say, I'm watching them break the rules to win an advantage in Senate decisions. As what Texas is saying, we're looking at with the Georgia runoff race, a 50-50 split if Democrats win, in which case the vice presidency is extremely important. And that's where Texas says they have standing. Here's the actual latest news, because I know a lot of people are saying all these states are joining. And here's the latest news. Alabama and Louisiana AGs want to join Texas election lawsuit against battleground states. There are a few more states, but this is what I have so far, and then I'm going to show you where the Trump supporters are at. The attorneys general of Alabama and Louisiana have expressed interest in possibly joining a lawsuit filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton to have the Supreme Court invalidate election results in 4 key battleground states: Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The suit seeks to have each state's lawmakers decide their electors rather than having the electors reflect the will of their voting citizens. Technically, that's not true. You see how Newsweek tries to play these framing games? What Texas is saying, the electors have the ultimate right to appoint. The legislature has the ultimate right to appoint electors, but there's been undue interference, illegal essentially, unconstitutional, by other parties in the state, and the electors should not reflect the will of the governor. They should reflect the will of the state legislature. That's the argument. Now, you can say the election was free and fair and whatever you want to say. That's not the point Texas is making. Okay, you can argue they're wrong. It's fine. Quote, the unconstitutional actions and fraudulent votes in other states not only affect the citizens of those states, they affect the citizens of all states of the entire United States. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall said in a statement published Tuesday on Twitter. He pledged to join Paxton's case if the Supreme Court takes it up. So this is big. In a separate statement, Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry wrote, some states appear to have conducted their elections with a disregard to the U.S. Constitution. Furthermore, many Louisianians have become more frustrated as some in media and the political class try to sidestep legitimate issues for the sake of expediency. I completely agree with that. That's what the media is doing. Admit it, Joe Biden is president-elect, technically based on media projections. Legally, not until January 6th. Landry claims that because the Constitution leaves the power of deciding the time, place, and manner of holding elections to state legislatures, the 4 aforementioned battleground states made changes to their elections to prevent further spread of ongoing COVID-19 pandemic without passing these changes through the legislature. Thus, Paxton's suit claims the changes were unconstitutional and the state's election results should be invalidated. Louisiana citizens are damaged if elections in other states were conducted outside the confines of the Constitution while we obeyed the rules. That is basically what Texas said as well. The legislatures of the 4 battleground states named in Paxton's lawsuits are all Republican-led. Thus, if the legislatures were allowed to choose who to cast their electoral ballots for, it's conceivable they might choose to cast their electoral ballots for Trump, the Republican incumbent. Or they could say, we abstain because of the conflict. And then nobody gets 270, contingent election, Trump wins. You see the play? Georgia has 16 electoral votes. Michigan has 16. Pennsylvania has 20. And Wisconsin has 10. The combined total of 62, if taken from President-elect Joe Biden's current total of 306 and applied to Trump's current total of 232, that would give Trump 294 electoral votes and effectively hand him the presidency despite losing the popular vote by over 7 million votes. Yeah, welcome to the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen. However, this scenario would require the Supreme Court take up Paxton's case, something that their recent rulings have suggested they're not eager to do. On Tuesday, the court rejected an effort by Pennsylvania Republicans to invalidate Pennsylvania's popular votes and let the state legislature choose its electors. Well, they denied injunctive relief, but I think it's fair to point out again, if they're going to deny the emergency injunctive relief, what could the Republicans win, even if they do hear the case? Because by the time the case is actually brought up and ruled on, it may be too late. Maybe not. Honestly, at this point, I don't think any of these deadlines in the Constitution matter because no one seems to think they do either. And that's kind of a freaky thing, I guess. But I mean, think about it this way. If we get to January 6th and then evidence comes out like, I don't know, China printed fake ballots or something ridiculous, like something really shocking and absurd, then are we just going to sit here and be like, well, the rules are the rules? It reminds me of that Simpsons episode. You ever watch Treehouse of Horror, like way back in the day, where Kang and Kodos, the two aliens, run for president as Bob Dole and Bill Clinton. And then in the end, when it's revealed that both candidates are aliens, one guy's like, I believe I'll vote third party. And they're like, go ahead, throw your vote away. I bring that up because it's like the joke was, even though they knew they were going to be walking into supporting an invading force, they're like, well, I guess we have to do it. No, I don't think that's how things would play out. If it turns out that we have substantial evidence of some kind of craziness, shenanigans, foreign interference, like legit hard evidence, then come January 19th even, there will probably be some like serious overhaul. Like, could you imagine on January 20th, as Joe Biden like gets ready to put his hand on the Bible, like hard documents and proof and witnesses and just irrefutable evidence comes out that he is working, compromised by China or whatever, they'd just be like, nah, it's not, we're not doing this. Something to that effect. I can't imagine everyone would be like, oh no, now we have to swear in this guy who we know is doing something wrong. I'm not saying Joe Biden literally there's also evidence against him, although I personally think the Biden family is compromised because we've heard it from his business associates. We've heard it from a Chinese professor who said in a video that they basically are. And Joe Biden flew his son on Air Force Two to China. But I digress. Let's get back to the news about the Supreme Court. Long story short, I don't think it matters what these deadlines are. I think it matters that the American people will decide. And if that's the case, it means Trump needs as much legitimacy as possible. They say the attorney generals of the 4 battleground states mentioned in Paxton lawsuits condemned his legal filing as anti-democratic and without merit. Absent any action by the Supreme Court, the Electoral College's electors are set to meet on December 14th to cast their final votes. After that, the final vote count will be approved by the U.S. Congress on January 6th, the last formal step to finalize the election results before Inauguration Day on January 20th. Okay, so they go on to mention we've got Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. All right, we've got Arkansas as well. A.G. Rutledge statement on recent Texas motion before U.S. Supreme Court. A.G. Rutledge will legally support Texas motion. Arkansas and Americans across the country have real concerns about the lack of integrity in our federal elections this year. After reviewing the motion filed by Texas in the U.S. Supreme Court, I have determined that I will support the motion by the state of Texas in all legally appropriate manners. The integrity of our elections is a critical part of our nation and it must be upheld. Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. We also have Eric Schmidt of Missouri saying, election integrity is central to our republic and I will defend it at every turn. As I have in other cases, I will help lead the effort in support of Texas SCOTUS filing today. Missouri is in the fight. So there's a bunch of others. Let me pull up Ali on Twitter. He said 7 states have now joined the lawsuit. That's not correct. He did correct this, but Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, South Carolina, and South Dakota. He goes on to say in the end, I got ahead of myself. Keep making those phone calls working. Big news will be public soon. What is before the court is a motion for leave. There is no procedural vehicle to join yet. If/when the court takes it up, more states are ready to intervene. In the meantime, Amici is coming. So I can't tell you exactly what that means, but let's do this. Let's just go to the Donald.win. If you're not familiar, the Donald.win is quickly becoming one of the most prominent political websites in the country. I'm not even exaggerating. Their Alexa rankings are through the roof as Trump supporters flock to this location to get access to information. And I will tell you this, it is an absolute echo chamber. But I will also add, something really funny happened the other day. I woke up and this is when we got news about Texas filing the case, filing the lawsuit, essentially, or permission for leave to file the complaint in the first place. It was only Breitbart that reported it. And there was nothing on the website from Breitbart. It was like, Texas files suit. And there was nothing there. And so I reached out to Breitbart and I was like, do you have the filing? Because I can't find this story anywhere. And so whenever I cover something of this significance, I want the evidence. Okay. So I reached out to Breitbart, asked them if they had the filing available, and they published the filing to the website. I was then able to read it and say, there we go. I brought this up when I did my video because I was like, the only people reporting this are Breitbart, and that's kind of crazy. Something funny happened that the Donald.win people mentioned, that people on Reddit, r/politics, which is far left, were like, how come only Breitbart is reporting this? Shocked. They didn't realize the mainstream media has been lying to them and covering up these stories. They don't get it. How insane is it? I wake up in the morning and no one has covered possibly the biggest story in the election so far. That's crazy. And it wasn't for several hours until many of these different outlets started picking the story up because people noticed what was happening. I bring that up because when you go to the Donald.win, they would show you that that was happening. And so they may be hardcore Trump supporters, biased in an echo chamber, but you need to be able to, you need to balance your news consumption diet. If you're on Reddit going to r/politics thinking you're getting a healthy view of what's going on, you are not. You are getting leftist echo chamber propaganda. And if you go to the Donald thinking you're getting the real truth, well, to be fair, you're probably getting a better view of what's going on than the politics people, but you're still in a hyper-partisan biased echo chamber. That's why what you do is you read both. To be fair, though, I lean towards, look, you go to the Donald, you're more likely to find underdogs who are challenging the mainstream narrative and often fact-checking a lot of what they say. And that's the reality. To be reasonable, as I have to try to be, you will also get, kind of silly, hyper-partisan comments and things like that. But take a look at this. On the Donald.win, this is this massive Trump supporter community. They straight up say, massive disinformation effort on the Donald.win ongoing. They are correcting the record. Look at what they do. 1, no other state has joined the Texas lawsuit. Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Missouri AGs have released statements appreciating or supporting the lawsuit, but no state has yet joined the lawsuit. This could change, but for now, none has. SCOTUS has not accepted the Texas case. The case has been docketed, just like the PA case has been docketed. SCOTUS has yet to decide if they will hear the case. While I do expect them to, they haven't done so yet. They say 3, SCOTUS has not rejected the Mike Kelly PA lawsuit. Jenna Ellis says, the Supreme Court only denied emergency injunctive relief in the order. It did not deny cert. Mike Kelly PA's suit is still pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. This means the merits of the case have not been rejected. And the case not only is still active, but can also be merged with the Texas case. It can also not be. And the Texas case can be independent. No certainties here. Well, again, I had Will on, and he's a lawyer. He said, why would they merge it? That makes no sense. That was his opinion when we were talking about this. So I'm not, look, I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you exactly what to expect from this, but I can tell you, you go to the Donald.win, they're going to issue corrections. They're going to say it's not this craziness that's going on, but they also are very much into the Dominion voting stuff. In my opinion, you may be familiar with the hammer and scorecard and Dominion voting machine stuff. That was one of the worst things to ever happen to Trump during this cycle. I'm sorry, I'll put it this way. In this month, or this past month or so, where Trump is fighting to win in the courts, the worst possible thing that could have happened to him was his supporters, was Sidney Powell and Lin Wood pushing all of this Dominion voting stuff. I don't know if Lin Wood was, but Sidney Powell and his supporters were. I'll tell you why. Trump needs legitimacy. In this fight, Trump needs to convince people to hear him out. It's the most important thing. If I've got hard evidence, I've got the murder weapon, I'm playing Clue, right? We know who did it. But if you start telling people there's this big grandiose conspiracy originating with this Venezuelan company that was then, run through these shell companies, and now there's a grand conspiracy, it's called the Kraken, Trump loses legitimacy in the eyes of the public. I know many Trump supporters don't want to hear it. They're absolutely convinced it's true. And that's fine if you are, but you can't go to a regular person and say Dominion voting machines, blah, 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 and hammer and scorecard, because they're going to be like, you sound crazy. Absolutely crazy. But stop and think. What would happen if you went to someone and said, did you hear what's going on with this lawsuit with Texas? Apparently, like in the Constitution, it says the state legislatures are the ones who get to decide. And so Texas is suing because the other states changed voting rules without going through the legislature. That's crazy. That's a provable fact and a real argument. Now, from there, If you want to start introducing people to other bits of evidence and other big stories, you can. But Trump needs legitimacy. He's not getting it when you yell that there's an international conspiracy by, China or Iran or whatever to alter votes and that Joe Biden's in on it. I got no problem saying that I think Joe Biden's compromised. I think through his son. That's fine. We heard the same thing about Russia, so I don't think anyone else should have a problem with it either. Of course, they probably will. But there's evidence behind that. And I understand that going to someone and telling them that, they're going to be like, what? That's a huge leap for a normie who doesn't know what's going on. Trump needs people to make phone calls. He needs people to come out and make demands. And if they think it's some crazy crackpot, the moon landing never happened kind of conspiracy nonsense, they won't do it. Regular people don't know about this. That's why it was bad news. But I want to wrap up with something. And I think this will segue into a segment for later. But let me ask you something. Let me just gloat here for a second. Remember how Tim Pool was all like, Civil War and, all that stuff. And then people were like, it's never going to happen. And then John Podesta suggested Joe Biden should encourage the West Coast to secede from the Union. And everyone said it's still not going to happen. And they said, when's it going to happen, Tim? Why don't you talk about it? I have a lot of people saying that since the election, Tim, you haven't been talking about Civil War. Yes, I have. First, we are in fifth generational warfare, information war. If you want to gain control of resources, you need to control people. And you don't do that with force these days. You can. But these days, it's information war, propaganda and manipulation. It's why the media is lying about everything. And it's why there's hardcore Trump supporting communities. This is the battleground of our political civil war. I'll give you one simple example. Judge Sullivan and Michael Flynn. I know maybe you're not super familiar with it, maybe a little bit esoteric, hard to follow. Michael Flynn was coerced into pleading guilty to something that made literally no sense, lying to the FBI, even though he wasn't under a formal investigation and it was an informal conversation. They threatened his family if he didn't plead guilty, so he did. When Bill Barr came in, when Trump finally got past the Russiagate stuff, they tried to dismiss the case. The DOJ did. Bill Barr said, we're going to get rid of this. Judge Sullivan said no. Whoa. Wasn't that weird? That is political civil war. When you have a former national security advisor for Trump, the acting national security advisor, I believe he actually was at one point. They're trying to put him in prison and he's a general. Let me just stop and explain something very, very simply and break everything down. One side, one faction was trying to put a former general in prison. One side was trying to keep him out. You see what this is? They're trying to lock someone up, and it was completely arbitrary why they were trying to do it. This is fifth generational warfare, convincing you Trump had done something wrong while locking up someone who dared oppose the establishment elites. My understanding is that Michael Flynn kind of ratted out Obama for supplying resources to really awful groups in the Middle East. I'll put it that way. Terror groups. And so they went after him, and Trump defended him. That's political civil war. But let me slow down for y'all. And I think we're going to do a bigger segment on this later today. When you have right now officially one state filing suit and 4 more joining, and now there's rumors that many more states will join as soon as the Supreme Court accepts this. What happens when you have 20 states challenging the presidential election? We got fighting in the streets. We've got a Supreme Court battles over the election. You've got many states lining up against other states. What happens if Texas files suit and the Supreme Court says, we accept it, let's hear it. And then all of a sudden, a wave of more states come in and say, we're joining the suit. And then what happens when a bunch of other states join, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia, and say, we're joining them. Or they'll file amicus briefs or whatever, however it works, in defense of or rejecting or fighting back or even suing these other states. Political civil war. I am not saying that Texas is going to send in the National Guard to other states. I'm saying the states are lining up against each other in fifth generational warfare. Now, final thought on this. Last night, Will Chamberlain told me that he didn't think the Supreme Court would take this up because possibly, they wouldn't want to open the door to this kind of serious state against state tensions and battle. And I said, if you have 8 states that are demanding to be heard and 74 million people who are lined up behind them, and the Supreme Court says, we refuse to hear what you have to say, you have just disenfranchised those states. And that could be substantially worse. People want to be heard. They want their complaints heard. And if you tell them no, they'll feel powerless. And then they'll say, then why bother? But if you hear them out, even if they lose, at least they'll feel they had their chance. We'll see. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.